Why is it that BROOK is a devil fruit user that can walk on water while carrying a person? Ever notice how BROOK never actually reached the destination Kuma sent him to? Instead, he got intercepted by that summoning circle. Why did it take BROOK a whole year to return to his body, when usually the effects of devil fruits are pretty instant? Is it possible BROOK's soul is in the wrong body? You're back with Denden Kushi on another episode of OPM, or One Piece Mysteries if you want the full title. Now, once you've returned from the underworld, hit the sub button and let's get into it. Amidst the mysteries of the Grand Line, the enigmatic nature of devil fruits, and the countless secrets of the One Piece world, there lies an interesting possibility that BROOK's soul may have returned to the wrong body.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
BROOK is a mysterious character, and no one really seems to recognize or connect to him throughout the story, and he's particularly withdrawn when it comes to information about the past. For example, we see a ton of ellipses when he hears people say spicy stuff, the most prominent of which is probably when the name Bin Smoke is mentioned. While it's widely known that the Yomi Yomi no Mi allowed BROOK's soul to return to the living world after his body perished, today we look at whether another consciousness might have found refuge within his revived body, and try find out if the Soul King really is BROOK. It's possible that another entity, whether it be a spirit, a remnant will, or even a fragment of a lost soul, latched onto his body during its time adrift the One Piece oceans. After all, fruits can have a will of their own, right? And we did see something similar between Ryuma and BROOK, let's not forget, so maybe the will of the Yomi returned to BROOK's body instead of BROOK's will, or even in addition to BROOK's will. Not only that, but the underworld seems to be an ever-present theme in the story, with Saturn's recent satanic ties and the countless previous references to hell. Furthermore, the Yomi Yomi no Mi translated actually means underworld fruit. We can find more strangeness in BROOK's behavior, along with some unexplained actions, such as his occasional moments of uncharacteristic seriousness or unexpected skills that he himself doesn't recall acquiring, suggesting these skills might be attributed to some other mysterious presence influencing or guiding BROOK. This may be the reason why there's no reference to panties while BROOK's alive. Franky even questioned BROOK on how he stayed sane while being on his own for so long, so maybe BROOK wasn't alone after all. Maybe he was accompanied by another will. BROOK is a musician, and not just any musician, but one of the most famous in the world of One Piece. Music in the One Piece world has mystical properties that affect Will, from the drums of liberation to Apu's strange devil fruit ability.
That's weird.
In his cover story, BROOK reached global audience with his sound. Could it be that BROOK's popularity and music was influenced by this other soul? Maybe this is where BROOK got his name Soul King from, originally, reminiscent of Zoro's ties to the King of Hell. Additionally, sound and music can be used to guide souls of the dead, for example with the Bell of Shandora. This is actually quite similar to how devil fruits reincarnate too, but I'll cover that another time. It also ties deeply into what is probably BROOK's most distinctive character trait. I'm referring to BROOK's solid connection to the ferryman of the River Styx, commonly known as Sharon. This is a character you've likely seen in media before and is most often depicted as a skeleton on a small boat, trafficking souls from the land of the living to the realm of the dead. The word BROOK actually means river, and the ferryman himself is said to be an old man that carries souls across a river that lies between these two places, much like we see with BROOK's fruit. It's customary to pay the ferryman a coin, and in Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid, the dead who could not pay the fee had to wander near the shores of the Styx for 100 years before they were allowed to cross the river. This runs eerily close to BROOK not being able to find his body for an entire year, and may help us in solving why it took him so long. The theme of paying a coin is only really shared by the Davy Back fight in One Piece as far as I could find, but if you have any other ideas, do please let me know in the comments. In the Davy Back fight, we see players sacrifice 3 coins before starting the game as an offering to Davy Jones. Fascinatingly, Davy Jones was also tasked with ferrying the dead, so there very well might be a connection between BROOK and the Davy Back fight, still to be revealed. An additional hint may be the fact that Luffy had an afro during the Davy Back fight, something which BROOK donned. Considering how keratin, such as in hair and nails, appears to be capable of sending and receiving signals in the One Piece world, it could be possible BROOK's afro acts as some sort of antenna, as discussed by Dak and myself in countless videos at this point, suggesting this added to the reason why BROOK was intercepted resurrected after being pawpawed by Kuma at Sabaody. Brook also recently mentioned an afro when seeing Bonnie trapped in the eddy before Egghead, so the theme is pretty relevant. Anywho, back to the theory. In Wano, Luffy was revealed to have the Sun God fruit, accompanied by information from the Gorosei stating some fruits have a will of their own, and that their names aren't always what we think. Perhaps the will of the Yomi Yomi or the will of the original owner of the Yomi fruit is inside our favourite musical Straw Hat. It is definitely possible for previous users to connect through their fruits, as we saw with Luffy and Joyboy. 3-Day Trip and myself recently posted a video about the Emerald City, and the fact will is often portrayed using the colour green. Think like Green Lantern, for example. It's possible that if Brook does house another ego inside him, the presence could be what we saw when the green spirit comes out of Brook. Big Mum is the Soul King, and she has a similar looking spirit coming out of her, which she calls Misery. So the users of the two soul fruits both have some strange spirit or Klabauterman type thing that comes out of them, and it affects its surroundings, both of which are green as well. A potential candidate for the will that inhabits Brook's body is the Soul King, as I mentioned earlier. Soul King is Brook's epithet, but we also see Oda giving Brook a crown almost every chance he can. I mean, do we really think it's coincidence that the Soul King Brook and the Soul Queen Big Mum ended up sleeping in bed together? And they also clashed again in Wano. In Egghead, we saw Saturn pop out of a summoning circle. Brook was potentially intercepted by a summoning circle when Kuma sent him away for the time skip during Sabaody, as opposed to Kuma intending to send Brook to Nakamura Island.
Did you mean to do that?
Yeah.
It also means Kuma didn't simply send Brook to an island for some panties. With that said, tell me in the comments where you think Brook was being sent originally by Kuma before he got pulled onto Nakamura Island, because in complete honesty, I have no idea.
I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know I'm doing it really, really well.
I've actually looked and I don't have a clue, so if you have any idea, let me know and maybe I'll bring it up in another video. Later on in this cover story, Brook was essentially hijacked and taken on tour, where he became a world-famous musician. Now, seeing as Brook wasn't supposed to land on Nakamura, it follows that his journey thereafter was unintended, and it just kind of happened to him. This is again reminiscent of the idea that some fruits have a will of their own. So if all of this is true, the idea sparks curiosity about the potential implications of the additional consciousness residing within Brook. It raises questions about its origins, character interactions, and how it might affect Brook's journey as a Straw Hat pirate. Whether this will be explored or revealed in the series remains a captivating mystery, adding another layer of depth to the story of the Soul King. After all, we saw him smile before he died, so there must be more to this Skellachad. Now, before I sign off, here's a real quick bit of food for thought. Brook is the Soul King. Zoro is clearly connected to Brook through the underworld theme, for example with ice, and is given the name King of Hell. In short, it might be the case that we see Luffy's lifespan issues catch up to him, and the Straw Hats need to retrieve their captain from Hell. This would make use of Zoro and Brook's ties as the Grim Reaper and Ferryman. Anyway, if you've made it this far, you've just won free tickets to Brook's next concert, so let us know in the comments where you want them delivered. This has been Denden Kushi and the crew, and you have been great as always. Peace, much love, and bye. Welcome aboard, fellow pirates. Today's journey ventures beyond the ordinary, delving into uncharted territories of knowledge and discovery. Buckle up as we embark on an exploration that'll challenge perceptions, that'll take us into the dark spaces of the underworld in the One Piece story. We're going to be looking into the possibility that Brook might take Zoro to Hell, and whether or not they might come back with somebody else. So, sit tight, hit that like button, and let's embark on another spicy theory. The world of One Piece is vast and filled with diverse characters and factions, and one aspect that adds an extra layer of complexity is the idea of the underworld. From the black market to Hell itself, the series has given us glimpses into some dark places that operate behind the scenes. The criminal underworld works much like the concept of Hell, with there being many different levels that make it up. However, today we're talking about the deep, dark depths of an actual Hell in the One Piece story. We see countless references to demons, monsters, and devils, with the name even being found in one of the story's most unique features, devil fruits. Sanji and Zoro's attacks both have names that reference Hell, and we also see Hell depicted in places such as Impel Down. One of the most significant arcs exploring the connection between the One Piece world and Hell is his thriller bar. Gecko Moria, the antagonist, had control over a massive army of zombies, showcasing his power over life and death. His abilities raise questions about the boundaries between the living and the afterlife in One Piece. The connections to the underworld and hell in One Piece open up exciting possibilities for the future of the series. We've seen glimpses of these elements, but how might they play a role in the final saga? Could we witness a journey to hell itself, or encounter more devil fruits with ties to the afterlife? Devil fruits, as we know, grant extraordinary powers, but some seem to be directly linked to the underworld. Take a look at the Revive fruit, the Yomi Yomi Nomi. That allowed Brook to come back to life. The word Yomi itself is associated with the Japanese underworld, connecting it to the afterlife. Brook is of course the Straw Hat's musician. Sound and music can be used to guide souls of the dead, for example with the Bell of Shandora. It also ties deeply into what is probably Brook's most distinctive character trait. I'm referring to Brook's solid connection to the ferryman of the River Styx, commonly known as Charon. Charon is most often depicted as a skeleton on a small boat, trafficking souls from the land of the living to the realm of the dead. The word Brook actually means river, and the ferryman himself is said to be an old man that carries souls across a river that lies between these two places, much like we see with Brook's fruit. Now bear that in mind for a moment while I touch on another Straw Hat. Many of the Straw Hats have connections to demons and hell. For example, we saw Robin turn into some hellish demon type creature in Wano, but for now I'm going to be talking about Zoro, the Straw Hat with the most connections to the underworld by far. Enmura, for example, is an anagram of Amen, and Ohabekiri means heavenly feather cutter, so straight off the bat we see Zoro has strong connections to the afterlife. That said, no connection is more notable than Zoro's epithet, King of Hell. But rather than lecture you on connections between Zoro and Hell for the 1000th time, you can check out older videos for that. So for now, just consider his epithet and I'll get back to it shortly. Before we move on though, we need to quickly cover Sanji's ties to Hell briefly, so let's start with his kicks. They're named after fire or the Diablo, which is the devil, and Sanji was shown to use Hell memories a couple times also. Additionally, Sanji is considered one of the wings of his captain Luffy, with the other being Zoro. But why does all of this matter? Well, Luffy's life and journey is no doubt intertwined with the winds of fate. That said, time and time again our protagonist has come into some serious injuries over the course of the Straw Hats' adventure. Because of this, Luffy has had to receive several remedies, which have often reduced his lifespan. Most significantly would be Ivankov's hormone treatment, which took 20 years off Luffy's lifespan each time he used it, and he used it twice. Whichever way you look at it, irrelevant if Luffy has a strong will, he's running out of lifespan pretty quick. It's true Luffy was pretty much saved from death by the Gear 5 transformation, but can the Gomu protect Luffy from lifespan issues? Personally, I'm not too sure. I see lifespan as a separate thing in One Piece, like a body clock that ends when it ends, irrelevant of your will or how powerful you are. Otherwise, we'd have characters living to outrageous ages all over the story, but instead we only really have Kureha. In fact, Oda even used Kureha's age to suggest the limits of human age, stating humans could only live till 140, just for Kureha to turn 141 over the space of the time skip, highlighting Kureha as the only one who's currently reached that age. Now, what's actually going to happen? Well, my thoughts are that Oda didn't include the lifespan stuff for no reason, and so soon in the story, I believe we will see Luffy start to get super old, as we often do now. This actually happened a couple times in the recent Egghead arc as well. He wasn't looking too great at all. I believe in doing so, the Straw Hats will attempt to save him from the other side. This would include Brook ferrying the two wings of Luffy across to Hell, Zoro defeating the current King of Hell, and Sanji and Zoro raising Luffy back from the dead. This would encapsulate the metaphor of Zoro and Sanji being Luffy's wings nicely and finally clear up the speculation regarding Zoro's ties to the King of Hell in the story. Of course, with all three of these characters, Zoro particularly, there are more intricate ties to Hell, but as I said, I didn't want to just spend time going into all the connections to Hell. This is more of a what if and whether or not you actually think it's possible. So if you do, let me know in the comments. We can always look into this further or we can stream about it, it's up to you. But there you have it. Will Brook actually take the Straw Hats to Hell to retrieve their beloved captain? Whether it be metaphorical or physical, it's something I'd be keen to see. So if you're watching Oda, you better make it happen, my dude. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. As always, you've been great. Denden Kushi aims to provide grounded, free, fact-based theories, taking a deeper glimpse into Oda's intricate masterpiece. That said, if you want to buy us a coffee or contribute to some ideas, you can become a Patreon, become a member, or simply hop in our Discord and become part of a tight-knit community. Anyway, make sure you subscribed, like the video video, and make sure to join us for the next one. Till then, bye. Greetings, fellow One Piece enthusiasts. We have a fresh new theory that will reshape how you perceive the Gorosei and how Oda plots the future of the story. Now, hit that sub Saturn button and let's get straight into this one. What if I told you there's a countdown to a rare celestial event that will bring about the end of the One Piece world as we know it, and signal the return of Joyboy's kingdom? Could it be that the gathering of the Gorosei being on Egghead together foreshadows the biggest change yet? We all know how important timing can be, and it seems like a few significant characters in One Piece have been waiting on something, such as Shanks and Dragon. It might be that they're waiting on Nika, kinda like Kuma, or maybe they're waiting on Joyboy like Kaido was, or maybe it's the alignment of a certain 5 planets we call the Gorosei. Will Chapter 1111 be the big moment? Well, we've found clues that might answer that question. Today we are going to be showing you how Oda has planned the Gorosei's arrival on Egghead from the very beginning, how it indicates the end of the world government, and highlighting a small bit of text some might have missed on the final page of 1109, which is crucial to the story. There's no doubt One Piece often features references to the solar system and the cosmos in general, for example with Celestial Dragons, a cover story that features the moon, the names of the ancient weapons, and even potential space pirates. In Egghead, Vegapunk gave us a clue to the true nature of the One Piece solar system, which went against what we'd seen at the orrery in Ohara. Of course, the moon and sun play major roles, with our protagonist having the sun god fruit, and fans still debating if it's Emu or Blackbeard that represents the moon. Additionally, Christianity in the Bible seems to be more and more pivotal as the story progresses, and we've seen examples including the appearance of 2 different Bibles, Eva's Book of Genesis, praying, and large crosses. This is evident more than ever since the recent ties to the South Blue shown in Egghead, confirming what some of us predicted for years, which is Kuma, the South Blue, the St. Brice, and Christianity are all connected. It's important to note that Christianity and astrology are believed by many to be tightly interwoven, which we see during Egghead. It was during this arc that Kuma's backstory was revealed. Vegapunk, a scientist whose name comes from a constellation of stars, was introduced, and the Gorosei's names were revealed to be inspired by planets, and we even saw summoning circles. The motif at the very forefront of Egghead is the White Warrior, Nika, as demonstrated by Gear 5 and Kuma's backstory in the South Blue. Nika is a term most often displayed or associated with a cross. There's a constellation of stars in the real world called the South or Southern Cross. What sits exactly in the middle of the constellation? A star called Jinan, as in Jinny. Jinan means a bag of songs. There's also a star cluster there which is called the Jewelry Box, as in Jewelry Bonnie. But this is just scratching the surface. Some Christian interpretations predict the world as we know it will end soon. It's stated that, in a sense, this world will be turned upside down and the kingdom of God will finally come and free everyone. This era is indicated every 800 years when 5 planets align in what's called a grand conjunction. This event is said to happen in the presence of a crescent moon. So will we see this convergence in Egghead? The most anticipated planetary alignment matches up with the names given to the Gorosei and will be accompanied by a crescent moon, inferring the Blackbeard pirate Katarina Devon, also known as the Crescent Moon Hunter. It's said the planets will all appear on one side of the sun, as we saw with the arrival of the Gorosei. And as I mentioned earlier, this occurs once every 800 years, taking us back to the Void Century. This echoes Saturn's statement about not coming to the surface in a long time. Not only do all 5 planets align during the Grand Conjunction, but it also happens inside the constellation of Virgo. Virgo represents the changing of the kingdoms, which fits well as we see Luffy starting to become a global power and changing the ways of the world. Not only that, but Egghead is an ancient island with what appears like futuristic technology, reminiscent of what we expect of the ancient kingdom. So could it be that this is signifying the return of the ancient kingdom? Another wild detail is we got this small statement at the end of 1109 predicting a rare celestial event. It's particularly significant that we see it in 1109 as the following chapter will be 1110 and the one after that 1111. Both are numbers associated with biblical astrology. Not only this, but the quote explicitly implies there'll be consequences to the fact that for the first time in a long time, the Gorosei are all together at the same time on the surface. Earlier I mentioned the importance of timing, and it just so happens that Saturn is speculated to be Kronos. Kronos is the ancient Greek god of time. I'll touch on the ties to ancient Greece in a moment. Finally, another fascinating connection is in the real world there is something called the Toledo Letter. Now, this was almost like a petition or a letter signed by many people 800 years ago, addressed to the Pope, basically warning of the end of the world coming. Now, what's very interesting here is we actually saw a letter from Vivi revealing that she is a D. Now, these two could be very connected. It's very possible Oda got the inspiration of this letter from the Toledo letter, and the letter itself contained information that indicated the change of times. Now, with all that said, let's hand over to Straw Hat Lucas, who will tell us where all of this is going to go.
So with the God clock ticking, what in the world is about to happen on Egghead, and what is about to happen to the One Piece world? Abraham was said to be born during one of these rare celestial events, and is noted as the father of Christianity. Oda may very well have personified this with Kuma, a father figure whose faith in Nika was unwavering to the bitter end, and potentially the seed that will grow into the New World religion. After all, he pretty much sacrificed himself for the life of his daughter. We predict that we'll see a new faith spread across the world, the likes of which will lead to widespread rebellion and change. Virgo could signify a change of kingdoms between the world government and the remnants of the ancient kingdom, or D-clan. This would mean downfall of the Gorosei ultimately, and the rise of a new power, potentially Sword or the Revolutionary Army. In line with this, the people of the One Piece world may accept Vegapunk's new model putting the sun in the center of the solar system, portraying Luffy overcoming Emu. The 800-year timeline of this grand conjunction, matching with the 800 years since the Void Century, suggests soon this cycle will end, the will of D will be fulfilled, and a new era will start. We mentioned 5 planets converging. Why 5? Well, ancient Greece originally listed 5 planets. Later, the Romans adopted Greek teachings in part and added Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto to the roster. These are the names of the ancient weapons. Emu Nerona and her connections to Lily and Vivi suggest ancient Roman ties, particularly through ancient numerology. This might suggest Emu took over a prior civilization, and in doing so introduced the 3 ancient weapons. Now, let me ask you, if the ancient weapons are the Roman 3 planets and the Gorosei are the 5 Greek planets, it leaves us with Earth. Is Emu associated with Earth? The Shandians believe in a sun god, which we see encompassed by Luffy. So could Emu have the Earth god fruit? Some argue Emu represents Mother Nature, and the small body frame we've seen so far could be evidence towards Emu being female. Furthermore, this theory talks about the alignment of the 5 planets, but fascinating, the conjunction of 8 planets is called a grand trine, evoking connection to One Piece's grand line. In the real world, astrology has guided prophecy for millennia, and it's highly likely in One Piece Oda will reflect this too, in my opinion. For example, it could be that Laftel is only accessible over the Yule period, or becomes visible on the last day of Yule, the 25th of December, or as we call it, Christmas Day. Oda already included Lode and Polestar Island, both inspired by navigational astrology, and the 4 Lode poneglyphs were shown to make a cross, indicating the location of Laftel, which is reminiscent of a star constellation and how we use them to navigate. 3-Day even suggested all of the poneglyphs originated as stars in constellation, which is how Roger knew how to find them, and also why he left them where they were, and that Lily may have been the one to leave them as a roadmap for future generations to follow. The biblical connections in One Piece are a little conspicuous and easy to spot, like the ones I named earlier. Other important examples are Lunarians, whom are angelic, Seraphim, who are cherubic, Uruj, who is the mad monk, Mihawk, who has his crosses, Adam and Eve trees, Emu's Garden of Eden imagery, and of course the Radiant Sister Caramel. What are your thoughts on this theory, fellow pirates? Do you believe there's a divine planets guiding the Straw Hats on their journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue to unravel the mysteries of the One Piece together. If you've made it this far, you've just won an Oni of your choosing. Let me know where you want him delivered in the comments. Join us on Thursday when we get into how Queen Nefertari Lily sacrificed herself and shaped Amazon Lily as we know it today. Until then, may the winds of adventure guide your sails. Bye! Mwah, mwah, mwah. Kissy, kissy, kiss. Well, I went and did it. I went and accidentally solved the mystery of Emu, the Elder Stars, Joyboy, and the Void Century. By the end of this video, I will have convinced you of not only how Emu rose to power, but also how devil fruits are created, how the Gorosei came to be, and what happened to the ancient kingdom all those years ago. Or, you'll just think I'm another example of why we are glad it's Oda writing the story, and not the fans. Either way, I'm Straw Hat Lucas, helmsman of the last arc, and make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and summon an eldritch horror the likes of Saturn to hit that bell icon and stay up to date with everything we're doing. Let's go. I would make a deal with you to save Bonnie's life, even if you were the devil himself. Just save Bonnie. As I said in the introduction, I believe I have solved a good chunk of the mysteries in this story, and it's all thanks to a well-known German tale known as Faust. Faust was written initially by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe in between 1772 and 1775, before he finalized it in 1831, 1 year before his death. With thematic elements spanning lust, philosophy, religion, love, and death, Faust is considered one of the greatest Germanic epics of all time, and here to summarize this tale is Din Din Kushi.
Right, Faust begins with a devil by the name of
Mephistopheles,
bragging to God about the corruption he has brought upon the earth. He boasts and bets God that he can lead astray the most intelligent human, Faust, and condemn them to damnation. God says, bet bruv, let's get it cracking. We then meet Faust, a man who has learned all there is to know when it comes to earthly knowledge and is contemplating ending his own life. Right when he's about to do the deed, he hears the church bells and stops himself. Soon after, Faust meets
Mephistopheles,
and the mad lad talks to the guy and a deal is struck. Faust has grown tired of the mundane nature of human life and the repetitive cycle of it all, so
Mephistopheles
makes a wager. If
Mephistopheles
can help Faust transcend and understand the world and life in its entirety to the point that Faust will no longer want to take a self-induced dirt nap and will want to live forever, and in return, Faust will give up his immortal soul. That's the gist. Now back over to Lucas, where I'm sure he will go into more detail as it ties all into One Piece. Let's get it.
Thanks, Din Din. Now that we understand the basis of the deal, let's go into the outcome. Unlike most deal with the devil stories, Faust actually does come out on top in the end. After learning the ultimate knowledge of the universe, instead of becoming corrupt, Faust actually uses his knowledge to help humanity in every way he can, even uniting several kingdoms and leading them to prosperity. Uniting kingdoms, huh? Sounds very familiar, right? Emu did something similar, uniting kingdoms under the promise of prosperity, but I think Emu is actually the reverse of Faust, so let's dive into Emu and the Faustian deal. Now, a lot of this is speculation, but let me paint a picture for you, and to do that, we will have to go back 800 years. It is widely believed that the world of the past was one inhabited by pirates. If this is truly the case, and with the confirmation of Emu potentially being a monarch by Ivankov in 1086, I believe it would be safe to assume that the monarchs of the past were fed up with piracy, and specifically Joyboy and his crew. Emu at this point has tried everything from bounty hunters to privateers, but still cannot get the upper hand on this group of scallywags. And if we look at the cyclical elements of One Piece, I think we can speculate that at some point, just as Luffy did to Doflamingo, Wapol, Enel, and more, Joyboy liberated whatever kingdom Emu reigned over. This would be the breaking point for Norona Emu, a low of all lows. Emu has exhausted all possibilities, so they decide to make a deal with the devil. I believe Emu, just like Faust, made a deal for knowledge and enlightenment, gaining the knowledge of how to create devil fruits and how to make oneself immortal. In a reflection of Faust, I think the 5 members of the GOROSEI represent Mephistopheles. If they are not devils themselves, I think they were the royal court of Imu and were given the purest form of the devil that resides in each fruit. Hence why they need to be summoned to use their abilities, as we saw with Saturn. Now, how would Imu make a devil fruit? We know that you need a strong will for a devil fruit to come into existence from what Vegapunk implied on Egghead. So, we have to ask ourselves, when would a person's will be the strongest? When would a person want to do something like controlling fire the most? When they are intrigued by flames and their power? Or maybe while the flames are being used against them? What if the outpour of will one has at the moment of their life ending is enough to create a fruit? What I'm asking is, what if devil fruits are made through sacrifice? Allow me to explain further. I believe that when Imu made this hypothetical deal with the devil also gave them the first devil fruit, and explained how to make them, and maybe even added the stipulation that part of the deal is that Imu has to bring the devils from the underworld into the world through these fruits. Imu then, in an act of malicious retaliation, picked their first target for sacrifice, the race Joyboy had come from, and the followers of the sun god, the Buccaneers. We wouldn't know how Imu did the deed, but we would know that in their final moments, as this mass genocide was completed, the Buccaneers would pray and pray for their god, Nika, to save them, willing into existence the second devil fruit, the Hito Hito no Mi model sun god Nika. In a cruel reflection of the actions of current celestial dragons, maybe Imu even forced Joyboy, one of the few survivors of this onslaught, to eat this devil fruit. This seems to be a common practice of these terrible leaders in the world of One Piece, as we've seen with Boa, feeding the ones they see as below them devil fruits by force. Another world government approved means of sacrifice could be Buster Calls. Buster Calls would allow Imu to publicly annihilate an island without anyone knowing the better. Themes of sacrifice were also heavily seen in the Skypiea arc with the Shandians and their belief of sacrificing their own to stop disease and famine. Skypiea itself has been analyzed as a microcosm for the entirety of One Piece. So what if Oda was hinting at the ties between sacrifices and the wills of those who were sacrificed going into the creation of devil fruits with the Shandians, who believed that their ancestors' souls went into trees, but what if they just got it mixed up? What if the souls don't go into the trees, but the fruits they bear? There are points in the story we can assume these sacrifices were enacted. Circumstantial evidence tells us of multiple great cleansings Imu has pulled off, with Lucia being the most recent. Not only that, but look at the hunting games the Celestial Dragons play. These are hunting rituals that happen every 3 years. People slaughtered en masse with the world government's approval, and it could be that the games don't always produce a devil fruit, and that the repetition of them is because of that fact. If Imu has to make a devil fruit, let's say every 10 years to uphold the deal, they have 3 chances to produce one through the games within that time frame. And maybe if they don't succeed, that is what brings grounds for a cleansing to take place. Another chance to produce a fruit through sacrifice on a smaller scale has been on our faces this whole time, and that is the slaves of Maryjois, continuously put into a state of fear for their life, fear being one of the most powerful forms of will itself. Maybe, on the occasion, a slave's will is so strong that their resolve in death produces a fruit. Let's go back to the past now and proceed on the hypothetical situation. Joyboy has been forced to eat the Nika fruit and makes a pact with the ancient kingdom to take Imu down before Imu can enact their plan to take over the world. At this same time, Imu would be gathering together 20 kingdoms to form against the threat. Amongst these 20 rulers was Nefertari D. Lily, who caught wind of Imu's true nature and goal. Lily and Joyboy formed an alliance, and in the event that the ancient kingdom fell, 4 poneglyphs would be sent out, leading the next user of the Nika fruit to finish what Joyboy started, reuniting the world to its natural order that he and Imu's fight had destroyed. As I said earlier, Faust united kingdoms under beneficial reign, and I think Imu, in their deal for knowledge, did the inverse, uniting the kingdoms for their own gain. prolonging their life and rule in the process. Just like Faust, they accepted the deal, but unlike Faust, Emu wanted to live forever. Another element of Faust is after his deal was struck, he found love in Margaret, who turned her back on Faust after realizing who Mephistopheles was. I think Lily is that parallel. Emu fell in love with him, but as I said, after learning of Emu's true nature, Lily turned her back on him. Maybe, just like Marguerite's brother who sought revenge on Faust after he hurt his sister, Joyboy sought revenge on Emu after he hurt Lily. In Faust, Margaret is saved because she denounced the devil, just as Lily would be saved for denouncing Emu. That's only the beginning as well. There are even more elements of Faust I believe could tie to the Void Century or mirror the story of Emu, Joyboy, and Lily. If you'd like me to make a video going through those parallels, let us know in the comments below. Another possible Faustian deal could be between Joyboy and Emu. Maybe Emu is the devil in this scenario, and it was Joyboy who wished to unite the world into one piece, only to be betrayed by Emu so they could be the one to take control of the world. Either way, the evidence that Oda has brought a Faustian deal to the story in some way, shape, or form to me is very clear. At first, I thought I was stretching on all of this until the drop of chapter 1099, where on the very last page we see Kuma say, "I would make a deal with you to save Bonnie's life, even if you were the devil himself. Just save Bonnie." Only for the next set of panels to flash to Maryjois and Saturn himself, who, as I said earlier, could actually be a devil. This is what convinced me I was on the right track. The most recognized Faustian deal within the world of One Piece is with each fruit user making a deal with the devil when they eat their devil fruit, trading their ability to swim for power. Some elements I would like to add prior to the end of this video is that the Bridge of Tequila Wolf may also be a stipulation of the deal. Maybe the original deal was that Emu gained a 100-year reign, and after that bridge connecting the world to Maryjois would be built. Once the bridge is complete, maybe it signifies the completion of the deal, and Emu would have to pay their part, with Emu postponing the bridge's construction to draw out the terms of the deal even further. The 100-year reign would also possibly explain the Void Century, with Emu's first century in power leading to multiple mass sacrifices and overtaking the world. Another interesting deal that may not be a Faustian one within One Piece is the deal you make with Davy Jones during a Davy-back fight, when you offer up a coin for his locker. These points I really thought were interesting but couldn't seem to fit in with the narrative I'm painting here. Before closing, I would like to give a special shout out to Joyboy Theories, a friend of the last arc, whose video, Oda Hints the Forgotten Truth of Devil Fruits, helped me click the final piece between the Devil Fruits and Sacrifice together, so go check it out, there will be a link in the description. I can't say for certain what the terms of the initial deal between Emu and the devil could have been, but I truly believe that this is a factor that will play into the eventual reveal of the Void Century and Emu's past that we will get. The elements, parallels, and coincidences are there, but most of all, I want to hear what you think about all of this in the comments down below. Once again, I've been Straw Hat Lucas, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.
Oi, look, this is where Din Din Spot goes. Whoa.
Wait, what? I'm guessing this is why I've been cast to do this part, because the names are hard. This is ridiculous. Why doesn't anyone in the One Piece storyline ever die, except for this guy? The answer is that One Piece is a story about transformation, and death plays an integral part of that. In fact, whether it be physical or symbolic, One Piece actually features tons of deaths. It's just that we don't always see people's heads randomly exploding, and so some can be a little harder to notice. After death, there usually comes a rebirth, normally with some sort of upgrade, which helps the character achieve their goal. For example, Lucci returning in the story, but with an awakening. This is a metaphorical death, rebirth, and physical changes, as Lucci was in Cypherpole 9, but after failing his mission, he was hunted by the world government, after which he returned as an agent of CP0 with his power-up. Now, what has this got to do with yokai, and what does this tell us about the Gorosei and Emu? Well, hit that sub button, as only a small percentage of our viewers are actually subbed. And let's yokai straight into this. From the Bible to Journey to the West, death and rebirth is often used in myth to represent the archetypal nature of the sun, moon, and stars. The theme of the procession of the sun and stars is often reflected in media by characters and their story arcs, such as with Jesus, the Son of God. Big Mom and Carmel are great examples of this in One Piece, as they represent the Yule Festival, which entails the death and rebirth of the sun during the winter solstice. In real life, an example of this transformation in the human experience could be the change from a child into a teenager through the process of puberty. But what happens if the transformation is unsuccessful or too traumatic? Well, that's how demonic monsters are created, or in this case, yokai. This video demonstrates why yokai are one of the most central themes in the entire story, how they came to be, and what Oda has planned for the endgame of One Piece. Remember the shadows at Thriller Bark, or Kazumbo, the fire spirit summoned by Kanjuro? How about the Cypherpole cover page 522, or even Onigashima? These are just some instances where Oda integrated yokai-inspired elements into the narrative already. It's clear that Oda has drawn from yokai lore. For example, the Wano arc is a treasure trove of yokai references, from Kaido's dragon form to Onimaru, to Sukiyaki disguised as a Tengu guarding the road poneglyphs. Yokai are phenomena from Japanese folklore, so it does make sense we'd see a load of yokai references in Japan-inspired Wano. Over the years, many different English words have been used as translations, such as monster, demon, spirit, or goblin, but the term yokai encompasses all of them, plus more. From Tengo to Kitsune, their stories are rich with symbolism and cultural significance, similar to One Piece itself. Yokai are most commonly created by trauma and/or a tragic past. Think the stink monster from the movie Spirited Away, a spirit which is sick from pollution and as a result becomes a stinky demon. We can see this idea probably best illustrated in One Piece with Nika Robin. Robin's people and home were wiped out, and now she wishes to continue the Will of Ohara and its history of discovering and recording knowledge. Robin's peaceful life was shattered when the world government deemed the research on Ohara a threat, fearing it could uncover secrets they wished remained hidden. In what became known as the Ohara incident, Robin witnessed the island's destruction at only 8 years old, losing her mother and everything she loved. Now branded a fugitive as one of the last survivors of Ohara, her journey became a solitary and dangerous one, marked by constant evasion and survival. To make matters even more tragic, her skills as an archaeologist made Robin an invaluable asset to powerful individuals who sought to read the poneglyph. This is an intense amount of trauma for one person to take, and will inevitably lead to someone's transformation. It's possible that this trauma resulted in Robin's change of form during her fight with Black Maria, where she turned into an actual demon. No explanation was given, but she grew horns, wings, and lots of spider-like arms, then proceeded to break Maria in two. This wild and destructive emotional change contrasts Robin's usually stoic demeanor, suggesting Robin was losing control and unleashing a deeper power. The point of yokai in One Piece is to explore how characters transform under pressure, and the aftermath tells us if the person has changed for the better or worse, if they've succeeded in their transformation or been consumed by it. The most important point of Nika Robin's journey is that if she does the right thing by the end of the story, despite all the hardships she's faced, then she's a hero, and proof not every trauma victim will go on to cause more suffering, which is what was implied by Dofi's quote, "Kids who have never seen peace and kids who have never seen war have different value." If Robin can go through so much bad but come out good, then this can inspire others to rise above their demons and become enlightened. In other words, Robin represents hope. Hope that not everyone who is traumatized will become a yokai. Hope in humanity. This is the same hope instilled within the Will of D, driving Joyboy's dream until it is fulfilled. But what happens when the transformation doesn't result in a hero, but a demon instead? Is this what happened to Robin during Wano? Could it be that the Gorosei have been taken over by their transformations and are now demons? And was this Imu's plan all along? The opposite of a hero is a yokai. A good example of this is someone who has failed to fulfill their dream. Kaido was a Joyboy candidate that, unlike Luffy, is heavily affected by his traumatic past, where he was subject to world government experimentation and persecution. Oda even made it a point to explain to us Kaido made multiple attempts at unaliving himself, truly highlighting the depths of Kaido's sorrow. This pain is reflected in the impoverished state Wano has become under Kaido's rule. Kaido's character is inspired by yokai Kaido Maru. Kaido Maru is known as Oni Boy and is found in samurai stories, matching the Red Scabbard's B-plot we see in Wano. This yokai was said to be able to kill a boar by throwing a stone at age 8, and known to easily break the bonds that tried to imprison him. This is interesting as it reflects Kaido's imprisonment, but also Odin's experience with the mountain deity. So, in a sense, we see Odin as a successful Joyboy, Kaido as a failed Joyboy, with both characters being born in the same year. One is a hero, the other is a failed hero, and now ravages the land with drought, famine, contamination, and oppression. This is explicitly demonstrated with Kaido's different emotional stages while he fights Luffy. An important detail Oda included is that during these emotional stages, Kaido managed 6 attacks referencing the Buddha, but never made the 7th. We see this also with Big Mom, who manages 6 out of the 7 days of fasting in Elbaf, both reflecting how Kaido and Big Mom did not complete their journey to becoming Joyboy or a similar hero figure. Luffy, on the other hand, made all 7 transformations and became godlike. Ultimately, Kaido failed in his attempt to become Joyboy, and as a result became a yokai of sorts. Because of this, Kaido was defeated by Joyboy, thematically being sent from the heavens to the underworld to start his journey again. This was because although Kaido had a strong will, he wasn't in line with his environment, thus not fit to fulfill the will of D. This is much like what Whitebeard says about Blackbeard not being the one Joyboy's waiting. So, what about the Gorosei? Saturn arrived on Egghead as the yokai Ushi Oni through a summoning circle. Since then, Saturn has seemingly summoned the other members of the Gorosei to Egghead telepathically, followed by 1110, where we get our first proper look at the rest of the Gorosei's otherworldly forms. These forms were revealed to be as follows. Marcus Mars is revealed to be Itsamade, a bird-like yokai. This was anticipated by much of the community, particularly after seeing Mars' silhouette in chapter 1084. Walkiri is stated to be a Hoki, a Chinese mythical creature most famous from the journey to the west. Saint Ethan Baron, aka Gandhi Gorosei, was called Bakotsu, meaning horse bones, which is a horse that was burned to death in a fire and became a vengeful spirit. And out of all of the yokai we've seen so far, this is one of the deeper references that's harder to find in general text. Lastly, we have the outlier of the group, which is Jupiter as a sandworm. It's an outlier not only because sandworms aren't traditionally recognized as yokai, but because his name was the only one to be written in katakana. It's possible Oda was inspired here by the philosophy and themes of the expansive Dune universe and the infamous shadow worms on Arrakis, created by Frank Herbert. Fortunately, I'm a huge Dune nerd, and so I can elaborate a little more on the significance of sandworms in Dune and what Oda might be trying to get at. Out of all the Gorosei, we currently know the most about Saturn. Saturn is shown as an Ushi Oni, a yokai known to be a poisonous mania. In one myth from the Edo period, a lord shoots the Ushi Oni with a bow, resulting in his wife getting sick from a curse, echoing what we saw with Ginny during her flashback. Additionally, Gyuki is the name of an attack Zoro used to defeat T-Bone. Interestingly, despite having little information on the Gorosei, it appears Oda has subtly woven in some background information into Saturn's character, which may help us put some puzzle pieces together. J. Garcia Saturn is a high-level but unnatural Ushi Oni, developed by technology and secret knowledge, such as an understanding of awakenings or the true nature of devil fruits. Then finally we have Black Maria as a lesser Ushi Oni, with a basic zone fruit which requires a supplement to change forms. What I think Oda is doing here is demonstrating the 3 levels of transformations. Black Maria at the bottom with a basic devil fruit, some technology and limited knowledge. Then Saturn a level above her with a more capable devil fruit that also grants him full control over his form without using rumble balls or any technology. And also, of course, a vast understanding of science and esoteric secrets. And finally, the demon of Ohara, Robin, at the top, being an actual real yokai coming to life through her oppression and pain without needing any special trickery. This is why I think Oda showed us Sanji calling for her to sort of evoke this response. Also, this harkens back to the idea that if Robin can overcome her trauma, anyone can. I speculate that Saturn will be defeated by someone who can overcome his scientific ways that connects particularly to poison and sickness, such as Chopper. Now moving on. Marcus Mars was predicted by many to be Itsumade, and rightly so. According to its original myth, a terrible plague spread during the fall of 1334, and the suffering of the plague victims is what summoned the Itsumade. They are said to fly over areas where there is suffering or death in general as they feed off the suffering. Notably, Itsumade was said to be defeated by an expert bowman who shot the yokai out of the sky, similar to other yokai we've seen, just not with the sky element involved. Considering the bird motif of this yokai and the style of the character looking like something off the moon murals we've seen, we may be able to assume this GOROSEI member connects to Skypiea. Okay, and on to the next. Walkuri is a giant boar with 4 tusks known as a Hoki. This particular boar originated in Chinese mythology and is most commonly known as Fengji. This type of boar appears in Journey to the West, named Boar King, as well as other myths also, and has been used to represent an ancient rain deity as well as the human connection to the natural world. It's worth noting as well, the design itself that Oda gave us features a pattern similar to what we see with Law, implying Walkuri might tie to the North Blue. Okay, so next we have Saint Ethan Baron, who is revealed to be the mythical creature Horse Ghost. In many versions of the myth, the horse was mistreated or abused, and the horse meets a tragic end, often involving fire or burning. Following his death, the spirit of the horse returns as a vengeful ghost, seeking revenge against those responsible for its suffering or unjust demise. In some versions of the myth, the vengeful spirit can be appeased or laid to rest through the acts of repentance, restitution, or ritualistic ceremonies performed by individuals seeking forgiveness or redemption, which sounds to me exactly like Zoro. And lastly, Jupiter was shown to be a giant sandworm. The fact his name was written differently to the other GOROSEI members and he does not reflect a typical Asian mythological creature may suggest Jupiter is the GOROSEI member most different from the others, and additionally may mean he's from a different era. The sandworm as a symbol represents the desert, of course, and often acts as a protector of treasure. What I find most interesting here, however, is that this is the yokai we get that is closest to a serpent. The GOROSEI were revealed to not be snakes or dragons, which is interesting seeing as Joyboy has so many connections to serpents, and serpents play a large role in the One Piece story also. So, with these huge new reveals, it leads us to ask, does Emu have any other forms? And even, did Joyboy have any other forms? There are countless ties to serpents, like I mentioned, in One Piece, so maybe one of them could turn into a huge snake or a leviathan or a dragon. Is it possible Joyboy's Will of D ties to these mysterious transformations? The answers may actually lie outside Maryjois with other yokai. The Will of D is inherently tied to the theme of yokai in One Piece through its main feature, death and rebirth. It seems that if a character can fulfill their part of the Will of D, then they die smiling, as with Roger, who inspired a whole generation to search for the One Piece. However, if they fail, then they die frowning, like with Noland, and their messages become distorted, as we see with Noland's Book of Lies. The Will of D was introduced in Drum Island alongside Kureha and Hiruluk saw something in the West Blue that led him to sacrifice himself with a smile on his face at the end of the arc. Chopper now carries on his dream of finding the cure to everything as a member of the Straw Hat crew. Kuina died, leaving Zoro with a dream to become the world's best swordsman, and he went on to become. Furthermore, Robin's entire people and home were wiped out, as I mentioned, and now she finds herself on the crew of the future Pirate King. Point is, despite the fact that some characters have trauma, not all characters become yokai, but instead seek a better future and become potentially heroes. Now, this is echoed in the most prominent case of death and rebirth in the entire story so far, which is the climactic scene in Wano where Luffy's heartbeat restarts, and our protagonist is reborn as the Nika-esque Gear 5. What this rebirth will entail, we're yet to fully understand. However, we did see Luffy gain a godlike power, where he can realize anything imaginable into existence. Oda was pretty explicit with this example, and it pushes to the forefront of the story how the theme of death and rebirth are some of the most integral themes in storytelling and in One Piece. What it means in this instance is that Luffy has accepted his environment and his destiny, and that all elements are in the right place at the right time. In other words, harmony. By doing so, Luffy gains a surreal power-up and breaks down the boundaries of what's real and what's not, even for the reader. The main message here we can assume is you can do anything if you will it enough, and if it's in line with the environment. On the contrary, we have Blackbeard, a D-Clan member that looks like he's on the way to becoming a monster. As I mentioned, traits and ideals can transform multiple times from generation to generation, such as with the Monkey family, who all have a strong desire for freedom, but each work for a different faction to achieve it. If Blackbeard has inherited Zebek's will in a twisted way, it may follow that Blackbeard is an inherited yokai in some sense. There's a small figure sitting in a strange position behind Whitebeard during this flashback that Marco brings up. The flashback reveals how Whitebeard and many others had a traumatic past since being made orphans by war. Sat in exactly the same position as Blackbeard when we saw his flashback panel under the moon, it appears though young Zebek is subtly hidden in the background. If this is true, then Zebek definitely also has a tragic past, which a lot of us assume anyway. He was first introduced as a silhouette, something we see with the Gorosei yokai form. He had glowing red eyes, which is a common feature of characters described as monsters, for example with the Florian Triangle and Big Mom. In the silhouette, we also see Rock's hair resembling Saturn in 1094. Rox is a member of the D-Clan, which could mean demon, another word for yokai. If Zebek could captain Kaido, Big Mom and others, then no doubt he was a top-tier combatant also. Through a war-torn past, it could be that Zebek was traumatized and held a grudge, leading to his transformation into a yokai also. That said, I personally speculate ultimately Zebek did the right thing at God Valley and was a morally good character, inspiring Hiruluk to martyr himself in Drum. It could be that Zebek was galvanized by the world government leading Blackbeard to inheriting wrong information and twist Zebek's goal to something darker. This demonstrates how even D-Clan members can be susceptible to trauma and can become yokai. We know that Joyboy failed his dream from the apology to Poseidon, so maybe in some senses he also became a yokai. Okay, so speaking of other yokai, what if I told you, just like Robin, there are other yokai-inspired characters that could even surpass the level of the Gorosei? As I mentioned 1,000 times already, yokai are deeply tied to death and rebirth. It's a motif that appears across a range of myths and, like in One Piece, usually denotes a transformation to another stage or plane. Kuma's character is partly inspired from the yokai Oni-Kuma. Oni-Kuma is a black bear with white markings. They're much larger than normal bears and are known to be very reclusive, kind of similar to Kuma's character in the story. This yokai, like others, is created through trauma. Through the pain and suffering of losing Ginny, Kuma is recklessly coerced by Vegapunk, allowing his lineage factor to be weaponized. Kuma makes several transformations from slave to liberator to cyborg and back to slave again, each time taking on a new appearance and a different agenda. In his recent flashback, we actually saw he'd visited the locations that he'd eventually send the Straw Hats to during the time skip. The flashback demonstrates it was likely intentional that Kuma sent the Straw Hats to each of their respective places during the time skip, which in turn means Kuma played a pretty major part in each Straw Hat's own transformation, which could be Oda's idea for his redemption after becoming a warlord of the world government and allowing the pacifista to be made. This is because the Straw Hats are going to make it to Laugh Tale and restore the world order, meaning Kuma's sacrifice did work out for the better. Overall, Kuma's character arc is very physical, resulting in him literally sacrificing his body to protect his daughter. That said, many cases of yokai death and rebirth within the One Piece story are pretty much entirely symbolic and don't actually have any effect on the narrative or story beat. One Piece often uses cover stories to express this. For example, in Buggy's cover story, when his crew mistakes their captain for dead and subsequently hold a funeral for him. He then returns to their surprise and rallies his crew, claiming victory over the locals, kind of. The point of this cover story is probably to illustrate a part of the ancient One Piece history, but within that, Buggy features going through his own transformation that allows him to complete his goal. This is a good depiction of a hero that completes the journey without actually affecting any narrative elements of the story. While these more subtle examples can be abstract, we can identify the transformation from what the character does after. This is the case with Useless Mid, or as some prefer to call him, Eustace Kid. Kid was living with the trauma of losing childhood friend Victoria. It led to his and Killer's hate for udon noodles. This was then personified in Wano by Kid escaping from udon prison. This is symbolic of a trial, and shortly after Kid faces another trial when he seeks out Shanks a second time. Kid fails this trial when he's utterly obliterated in one shot by Shanks, and we see as a consequence of the loss, Kid's ship Victoria is completely split in half and the ship and the crew take a plunge into the sea. This imagery likely is showing Kid and Killer essentially being baptized, and the Victoria being split in half is Kid detaching from his traumatic past with Victoria. So here, we are likely seeing a character that was traumatized, had conflict with his trauma, and will return enlightened after overcoming it. This may be why his name is Kid, as in he returns as a man, or potentially a reference to a baby goat, which is symbolic of sacrifice. Law could very well possibly display a similar pattern here, but with his own respective variation. On the other hand, what happens if trauma isn't dealt with? Well, you can never achieve your dream, and your dreams become nightmares, turning you into a demon. Kaido was set on becoming Joyboy, resulting in the suffering of an entire nation. When her hunger isn't satisfied, Big Mom becomes possessed and turns into the so-called God of Destruction. Noland never found the Golden City again, and subsequently was executed. As you can see, in One Piece, an unfulfilled will doesn't usually end well. Big Mom's a great example of a demonic transformation. When it comes to childhood trauma, none stand out quite like her. With Lin Lin, we see all the standard tropes Oda uses to depict a monster or demon from a younger age. Traumatic childhood, silhouette, red eyes, and even the animalistic teeth. She has all the features that make up a yokai here. She's also referred to as the God of Destruction and is clearly not your average human in size or in temper. If Big Mom survived her lather bath in Wano, as many expect, then this would be a monstrous feat, indicative of a deeper power, similar to how I mentioned about Robin. Her penchant for eating people and stealing life is a feature of yokai also, and she was on a pirate crew described as monstrous. Big Mom also has ties to the yokai Tsukomogam, which are inanimate objects that have a lifespan, often based around 100 years. The trauma a yokai goes through is what makes them so powerful, for example like we see with Big Mom. It often makes them dangerous, and so it might follow that the worse someone's past is in One Piece, the more of a threat they are to the One Piece world in some way. Son of Garp, but with opposing ideals, Dragon leads the Revolutionary Army. Garp, Sengoku, and Suru all joined the Marines the same year, and 1 year later, Dragon was born. At age 17, the God Valley incident happened involving Garp. At age 33, the Ohara incident occurred and again involved Garp, who refused to call the Buster Call in. The following year, Dragon creates the Revolutionary Army, suggesting the tragic Ohara incident was a catalyst for change inside Dragon. It would make sense for the destruction of Ohara to take a heavy toll on Dragon, as we can assume he's connected to Ohara through the physical resemblances shared between Luffy, Ace, Robin, and the current children on the island. And let's not forget, Dragon went to Ohara to pay his respects, taking flowers with him. Dragon is partly inspired by Sutoku Tenno, one of the 3 most famous yokai to ever haunt Japan. After he died, he transformed, bringing about his wrath upon the imperial government. It was an open secret that he was the true son of Emperor Shirakawa. This fits Dragon's character through his interesting name, made up of both the name of the protagonists, Monkey, and antagonists, Dragons, as in Celestial Dragon. Both figures are known to cause rebellion and can be seen as leaders standing for strong ideals. Not only this, but the yokai is often surrounded by storms, cloudy skies, and lightning. Whatever Dragon's mysterious past is, we can assume it wasn't pleasant, and that it shapes him and his agenda to this day. There's only one other character as significant as Dragon when it comes to traumatic pasts of the One Piece world. This is potentially Emu. Emu has been speculated to represent an Umi Bozu since the initial yokai reveal. Emu backwards is Umi, meaning sea or mother of sea. And Bozu is said to be a sea spirit or demon that resembles a giant human figure with an inky body and a big pair of eyes. They have also been described as ghostly and serpent-like, and are tied to ship meeting a tragic demise. Furthermore, they're tied to religion, and often said to be drowned priests or monks, which we kind of get a bit of with the other person we saw in Emu's flower room looking like a nun. Speaking of which, alternatively, Oda may have drawn inspiration from the Yawa Bakuni, who is a nun that lived for 800 years while still maintaining their youth. This extended life was granted after the nun ate a human-fish hybrid from an undersea world, possibly tying to the fishmen of One Piece. She was said to retire into a cave where she prayed day and night to be freed of her extended life for so long she eventually turned into stone. Okay, so after all that, in conclusion, we can be sure yokai play an important role in One Piece, from the demonic imagery present throughout the story. Going back through the story, we find many references that line up with the underworld and demons. And the Straw Hats each individually have their own trauma. That said, they seem to deal with it quite well and develop as people, shown through their personal journeys. During this story, this can be seen with Franky when he tries to stop the sea train only to fail and rebuild himself as a cyborg. This example shares the main elements of a yokai transformation, as we have an individual who goes through great trauma, metaphorically dies, and then is reborn with a chip on their shoulder. With the Straw Hats, the chip on the shoulder is the drive to fulfill their dormant role within the Will of D, which is a positive and heroic goal. This goal may have been passed down generationally, but we're yet to know for sure. This is opposed to causing suffering, which would be an evil or demonic goal. Inherited will is deeply tied to this cycle also, as it represents how dreams and hope are passed down over time in the real world. Like the self, if a character fails to develop properly, this can be problematic. The creation of a yokai, simply put, is someone who is stuck in their cycle by the choices they've made. These are often characters that are preoccupied trying to conquer their environment. This is opposed to Luffy, who only wishes to pursue what's inside himself, his dream to reach Laugh Tale. If Luffy can stay focused and not compromise his dream, then he and the Straw Hats will make it to Laugh Tale and achieve their dreams. So there you have it. Thank you for watching, fellow pirates. The intriguing connection between yokai and the One Piece world is a deep rabbit hole, so thank you for joining me, and if you did like it, make sure to, give it a like or a share. If you're not subbed, make sure you're subbed for more theories from Den Kushi, aiming for mostly Thursdays and Mondays at the moment. If you have made it this far, you've just managed to win yourself a free island whale, which Dill will deliver personally to your house. So make sure you let us know where you want it delivered. Other than that, keep sailing towards the truth, stroke a cat, be nice to your neighbours, and bye. Did you know in Egghead, Franky chose the futuristic clothing option over the Hawaiian? Ever noticed the strange relationship between Robin and Franky? Why could S-Snake only half petrify Franky? All this and more in this week's Den Kushi video. Before we start though, make sure to do me a favour and hit that sub button, as 90% of our viewership is actually unsubscribed. Now, without further ado, let's get into this. Okay, so what we're doing here today is essentially an analysis covering Franky's inherited will, his birthplace, his ties to Joyboy, and his connections to Pluton. So obviously none of them things we have confirmed. We're going to have to do a little digging and find out what clues we can basically look at and piece together what we can. So we're dropping some crazy discoveries about what we've found when looking at these things. Exposing some spicy secrets Franky may be hiding alongside me today is the eloquent and fellow TLA member Straw Hat Lucas, and we're dropping everything we've found so far on the shipwright of the Straw Hat crew and where his character development will end up by the end of the story. Like usual, we're going to start by giving you all the basic connections we found, which Lucas is going to start us off with in a sec, and then we're going to look deeper into what it all means. Okay, so if you'd be so kind, Lucas, take it away and get us started.
Thanks for having me, Din Din. Now, let me get into this. Hello, one and all. I'm Straw Hat Lucas, helmsman of the last arc, and I'm here today to bring the next part of a collaborative effort between myself, the rest of the crew, and our lovely Discord,
Which you should join through the link in the description.
to figure out exactly what is going on with all of our favorite cyborg shipwright, Franky, and more specifically, his will. Din and I have a couple ideas about it that we think could go down, so make sure you yell out super, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and radical beam that bell icon for my captain Din Kushi to say thanks for mistakenly trusting me to take this seriously. Now, let's start with the Will of D. Franky, besides being one of the sexiest Straw Hats, is one of 3 crew members that we know the least about, the other 2 being Nami and BROOK. So why is it that Oda has shrouded this man's past in so much mystery? All we know for sure is that he was abandoned by pirate parents on Scrap Island before being found and taken in by Tom. So let's take a look at some of the clues in subtext to see if we can't figure out a bit more about Free Rider Franky. Starting us off, we're going to dive into the sun iconography that ties our boy to Nika. Let's get the obvious one out of the way first, the Thousand Sunny. Built by Franky for the Straw Hats, the Sunny Kun's lion's masthead is adorned and stylized to resemble a sun. That's a given, and even the most casual fans can pick up on it, so I'm not going to dwell on the Sunny. Let's take a look at the next bit of evidence. Do you remember Franky's first introduction in the series? I'm sure most do, but let me refresh you a bit. Look at this beautiful specimen, but more particularly, look at the mask. The points upward and on the sides at first might make you think of a crown or a star, but combined with the frill of the collar, you get a different image. A sun. A sun nested on top of a bed of stars. Now, stars are all part of Franky's aesthetic, so why would he choose a mask and collar that resemble a sun? A symbol so intrinsically tied to liberation and Luffy in the story. Maybe it's a hint at his true lineage? Oda did use Franky to tease the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika on Zou. With all this sun imagery, it ties him pretty well to the warrior of liberation. Let's go a little farther, as I explain the most important piece of evidence for this whole idea of tying Franky to Nika in the Will of D itself. Also, before I do, if you want to stretch a bit, you could also say that his introduction as a child, Franky wears a shirt which bears palm trees that can only grow in climates with a good amount of sun, but that's kind of a reach. Moving on! Let's take a look at something I think most fans don't think about too often, and that's Franky's name. Not Franky, but Cutty Flam. Cutty, spelled C-U-T-T-Y, or C-U-T-T-I, or C-U-D-I if you're on the pursuit of happiness. Could come from 2 places. Cutty was once a slang term for perverted women, and Franky is definitely perverted, but I think Oda drew it from a different place. Drumming. Cut time, or playing cutty for jazz musicians, is a 4/4 time signature that has been cut to manipulate rhythm or tempo. This ties the name Cutty to Nika directly by the drums of liberation, but it gets even better when we look at Franky's first name, Flam. Also, fun fact from historian Cube of the Red Sea, in the French translations, Cutty can be translated with the TY becoming TI or DI, making his name literally Cutty Flam. But let's get to the flam. Flam, by definition, is a rudimentary and fundamental pattern within drumming consisting of a stroke followed by a grace note. When I first realized that not only Franky's surname but his first name both tie to drumming, it blew my mind. These combined with all the sun iconography that Franky is surrounded by tells me that Franky is tied to the D-Clan in some way, the enemies of the gods, and more importantly, to the sun god Nika himself. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below if you think Franky will be revealed to be a D-Clan member, or at the least, a descendant of the followers of Nika, which from my understanding are the Buccaneers. Now, am I saying that Franky is a Buccaneer? Not necessarily, but the last art thinks that he may inherit their will, but we'll let Din Din get to that a little bit later. Now let's move on to the next bit of will that may tie into Franky, the will of the Niku Niku no Mi, or the Paw Paw fruit. Let me ask you a question. What was Franky's honeymoon arc? As in his first arc as a Straw Hat, it was Thriller Bark. And what arc is Kuma introduced? Thriller Bark. Now we all know Kuma was there to stop Luffy, but what if the will of the Paw Paw fruit is intrinsically tied to Franky? Because to me, it's following him. After Thriller Bark, it's Sabaody, another massive interaction with Kuma and the fruit. Then, the most significant meeting with Kuma, at least in my opinion, Return to Sabaody, where he and Franky meet one-on-one as Kuma has protected the Sunny over the last 2 years. After this, Kuma is enslaved and basically a puppet, so he can't pursue and he only activates when Bonnie arrives on Egghead Island, coincidentally at the same moment Franky does as well. Now you may be saying this is all conjecture and circumstantial evidence. Fair enough, but let me point you to 2 images that hit Even more, that Franky will get the pawpaw fruit and carry its will. That being not only this color spread, where not only is Franky wearing a shirt with a bear that says the path of the bear, with his hair in the shape of bear ears, but Robin is also shown wearing a shirt with a blue bear akin to the same shirt worn by Mozu of the Franky family. Well, it's the beginning chapters of Egghead, where Franky is seen wearing a bear coat. Also, shout out to Mr. Bushido for pointing this out. Big ups, mate. How serendipitous and poetic it would be if Franky came onto Egghead Island as a bear and left as one. I think this, combined with all of the evidence presented by Din Din in the previous video, proves without a doubt that the Niku Niku no Mi will go to Franky by the end of Egghead. This still leaves the question, what is the will of the fruit? The one that grants the hands of liberation. Let's head back to Din Din Kushi to figure out how the will of the pawpaw fruit is the will of the Buccaneers and their kingdom.
So thank you for that, Straw Hat Lucas. You've got to start us with some strange connections, not only with Franky, but also the pawpaw fruit. Now let's look at some more ties and see how everything fits together and what it reveals. Primarily, we're here to look into Franky's will. We can be confident each Straw Hat ties back to Joyboy's era individually. It seemed to be the case for some of them initially, but at this point it's all but confirmed for every member so far. After releasing our first Franky vid months ago, I became super curious about Franky's ties to Joyboy and the whole Void Century period, mainly because I just couldn't see any explicit connections between the past and the present with Franky's story, which I found very weird. However, with the new Franky video, some major elements came together. With a little help from Go Roger and the TLA Discord server, we discovered there were two main paths to look into which could reveal details about Franky's inherited will, which were Franky's backstory and the ancient weapon Pluton. When we first start looking into this, we realise since S-Snake could only petrify half of Franky, it might mean he has partial invulnerabilities to other effects. That might have been what Oda was sort of hinting to us. This led us to look at Franky as a cyborg and whether or not he could swim if he ate a devil fruit. After all, this was the reason Franky gave for not eating the Mara to begin with. If, like the petrification, Franky is only half affected by the devil fruit's weakness, it may mean he's also able to go under water. For example, he could become a boat in some form or mix with the Sunny in a way that allows him to take the Straw Hats underwater, as suggested by some colour spreads. There are plenty more hints that suggest this as well. For example, when Luffy met Franky and Luffy commented Franky must be a devil fruit user right before he jumped into the sea and started swimming. Also, Franky's opponent in Dressrosa was Senor Pink, who obviously had the swim fruit, and Franky actually brings this up during the Egghead arc. Now, what's interesting about Franky's cyborg ship is that it ties closely to the theme of Klabauterman in One Piece. If Franky could swim with a devil fruit, even if it's with some sort of machinery or flotation device, then it would be pretty analogous to how ships are shown in the story to have a soul aspect. As I mentioned, the name given to this soul element in One Piece is Klabauterman. Franky was literally saved by a ship piloting itself, implying further ties between Franky and Klabauterman. We do see these vibes already with Franky and Kuma, as they're essentially machine bodies with human souls. I bring this up because there is something else in the One Piece world that many believe to be heavily tied to Klabauterman, while also connecting to Franky's love for ships and weaponry. The ancient battleship Pluton. In the recent anime episode, Franky had a very strong reaction to Robin revealing Pluton is in Wano, and in the manga he was one of the only characters to really care. Furthermore, Pluton is thought to have been constructed at Water 7, exactly where we met Franky. Interestingly, Pluton does indeed tie back to Joyboy's era, perhaps suggesting Franky's ancestors were involved with Pluton too. Franky's parents were said to be pirates, strongly implying they're familiar with ships also. Franky built the ship the Straw Hats currently use, and we also saw he constructed 36 mini warships called the Battle Frankies. He then set out to literally make himself the ultimate weapon. Franky at one point had the blueprints to Pluton and was in fact the person to destroy them, potentially being a reversal of his family making the blueprints or Pluton to begin with. Spandam demonstrated familial ties to the pursuit of Pluton. It wouldn't surprise me if it was revealed Spandam's ancestors were rivals of Franky's ancestors, and their relationship revolved around Pluton's century centuries ago. Franky was the reason Spandam wore a silver mask covering his face, which gives him the appearance of a cyborg. This is a nice touch from Oda, further connecting the two characters. We can see another tie with Spandam's weapon, Funkfried, which echoes the Klabauterman theme again, as it's a living will inside an inanimate object. I actually covered some ideas about Vegapunk and Funkfried in my Kuina Tashigi video if you did want to see more on that. Speaking of Vegapunk, many believe there to be some relation between him and Franky. Franky and Vegapunk share many superficial traits, but they also share some personality and thematic traits too, such as their mutual love for weaponry and scientific intuition. During the time skip, Franky was sent by Kuma to Vegapunk's home island. During Franky's backstory, we come across this weird situation with a mysterious boat that appeared out of nowhere and essentially rescued him, after Franky almost dies trying to stop the sea train. He went on to rebuild himself, after which his appearance resembles Vegapunk's designs, particularly the trademark star and weaponry. It's worth noting that yokai are traditionally individuals that have suffered trauma just to come back transformed as a demon, resembling what we see with Franky's rebirth, as well as with Kuma and many other characters throughout the story. Anywho, back to the mystery ship. Some believe this strange boat to be the Mad Ship, possibly the one on Dufeld's cover page during Egghead. This ship certainly has ties to Vegapunk, which we know through Franky's redesign. I, however, think it's more likely that Dufeld's ship and the ship that saved Franky are both something that connects the original equivalent of Mads, perhaps even Franky's ancestors. This could be Pluton, as I mentioned. I think it's possible Franky's ancestors made Pluton at the same time creating the first cyborg by fusing a soul to a battleship, creating Klabauterman. But if this is true, wouldn't Franky be sought after by the world government for his important lineage and the threat he posed? Well, bizarrely, as Lucas mentioned earlier, Franky isn't the character's real name. Cutty Flam is. Now, there's 3 wanted posters we can look at for old Frankenstein, so let's start with the smallest. It's a standard wanted poster with the name Franky instead of Cutty Flam, and with a picture of Franky with a metal nose and shades on. The next is a picture of General Franky, again with the poster saying Franky at the bottom. So, here we see now both his name and real face are obscured. Finally, we have the latest bounty poster where Franky's picture was just a picture of the Sunny, and his name and bounty were concealed. What I'm getting at is, Franky's wanted posters have never shown his true name with his true face in the entire story. I mean, if anyone even saw Franky try to stop the sea train, they probably would likely assume he died considering he failed. So, if Franky does get involved with Pluton in the endgame, that'd certainly be his character going full circle if his ancestors were also involved in legendary shipbuilding, and might be a path that connects Franky's will to Joyboy's and the will of D. However, there is a different angle we can look at with Franky that connects us back to Joyboy, and that is his backstory. Again, there isn't a ton of information at face value, but looking deeper, we can unravel a lot more. Off the bat, we see Franky's adopted family show symbols that connect to the ancient past. Tom has the sun symbol, matching the other symbols of the 8 kingdoms I've discussed before, and Iceberg has the whale tail symbol I never stopped talking about, both of which can be traced back to Joyboy's time. Franky can also be seen with this symbol in a couple of colour spreads. As Lucas pointed out, his real name Cutty Flam references a drum pattern possibly tying to the drums of liberation. Roger is one of the most connected characters to Joyboy throughout the entire story, and Tom was the shipwright that built the Oro Jackson, which, by the way, is still out there somewhere waiting to be found. Now, with some of the basic connections covered, let's analyse Franky a little deeper and see what we find. I did briefly want to touch on Franky's link to the South Blue and the Buccaneer race and sorbet, but I'll keep it short as it'll all be covered fully soon in a big sorbet Buccaneer video, so make sure you're subbed for that. In this image we see a ton of chins and facial hair that match up. You can follow this all the way to King Wapol and his pink-haired Bonnie-looking queen, Kinderella. These chins are mostly found in the South Blue, which is where Franky mentioned he's from. Similarly, we see this weird build among some characters tied to the South Blue. On Franky's pre-timeskip Jolly Roger, we can find 3 dots. As I mentioned in the previous Franky video, the eye, when opened, reveals a similar symbol to what we see with Kuma and the Komati tribe in Buggy's cover story. The symbol is no doubt pretty old, knowing Oda, and the Komati tribe were depicted as primitive. If Franky is connected to the tribe, this would give us another tie to the ancient history. Franky has ties to Kuma and the purple fruit that I covered in a recent video, where I also discussed Franky getting the fruit. In short, I think Franky ties to Sorbet, and so does his family. I think Sorbet specialised in weapons technology, leading to both Franky and also Eustace Kid ending up in the scrap heaps, in addition to them developing a penchant for weapons development. This could all tie into the Buccaneer will and how they had the technology to displace people, which is what the purple fruit does currently. Seeing as we've seen Buccaneers revere Nika, they may have used the ability to help certain races who wanted to flee their lands. This ability may have been weaponized by the world government in the form of the purple fruit, which could be a classic One Piece reversal. Reversing that again, Franky may then go on to get the purple and displace people back to their original homelands after Luffy completes his dream. It would be a testament to his humanity if Franky used his powers with good intentions despite the suffering caused to him by the world government, as opposed to, for example, using it as a weapon. This brings us to the most important part of Franky's entire character, in my opinion, or at least what Oda is most focused on: his humanity. Okay, so let's tie all this together before the video gets too long. If we look deeper into the story's characters, we can find some interesting references to Franky's humanity. In this sense, Franky and BROOK are like opposites, as Franky is a big body of machinery with little human parts left, whereas BROOK has barely any body, but has his whole entire humanity left. This is why BROOK plays music and Franky builds machines, for example. BROOK captures the soul aspect being dominant, and Franky captures the physical aspect being dominant. Evidence Oda intends these connotations is shown throughout moments between the two characters, such as Franky and BROOK crashing into Big Mom as a motorbike and rider. Big Mom is the Soul Queen, BROOK is the Soul King, and BROOK is riding Franky, the machine used to attack. One of the deepest moments between the two, however, might be when Franky questions how BROOK survived for so long on his own, considering his isolation and loneliness, likely reflecting what Franky felt during his own childhood. Additionally, we see Franky's transformation from human to machine pretty explicitly, with him developing weaponized machines while wearing speedos, revealing his pink human legs, and eventually upgrading himself all the way up to a super weapon. We also got hints towards this in an SBS. We got shown 4 panels depicting 2 timelines. In one, an old Franky literally becomes a battleship. In another, he resembles the General Franky. This matches what we saw on the Wanted poster after Dressrosa, where Franky was depicted by a picture of the Sunny. A detail some may have missed is the clothing machine in Egghead, where Franky chose the futuristic style over the Hawaiian. Hawaiian is of course Franky's usual dress sense. Subsequently, we see Franky transformed into a complete machine pretty much, and although he shares the same perverted traits Oda uses to express a breakout of emotion or humanity, it's only Sanji that reacts to the attractive appearance of the females during the arc. Franky, on the other hand, is completely distracted and stunned by the technology he's seeing. This is all to convey Franky in a less human state. But why would Oda do this? It's actually quite simple. It's likely because Vegapunk, Franky's idol, has done things throughout history that has resulted in terrible tragedy, most recently with York and the Mother Flame. I guess the idea is Oda wants to secure Franky's humanity so that by the end of the story and further, Franky doesn't go on to make the same mistakes. This also works as a reversal with Kuma, who had his humanity taken over by the world government and Vegapunk and became a weaponized buccaneer. To finish the point, like many characters, Franky went through a transformation. More literal than most, Franky physically rebuilt himself as a cyborg, reminiscent of Kuma's transformation later in life, while also highlighting elements of Vegapunk's character design, such as the stars Franky takes on. The 2 options I can see happening here are either Franky connects to Pluton, which is used in the final war and then destroyed, or Franky upgrades the Sunny using Vegapunk's insight to essentially allow Franky to combine with the ship, creating a almost pseudo-Pluton. The latter idea fits with what we saw with Uranus being remade by York into a pseudo-Uranus known as the Mother Flame. Now, the point I'm making is Franky needs his humanity intact in order to become a weapon on the same level as Pluton, while not abusing the power it wields. This is opposed to Vegapunk and his technology, which has led to so many civilian casualties, as I mentioned. In conclusion, I believe Franky was a child of the South Blue, where he was protected due to his lineage connecting to the creation of Pluton, and where he developed an affinity for weaponry. It appears, though, Franky has become more and more machine-like as the story progresses, but I predict after Egghead, his transformation will be complete, and he'll be a balance of human and machine, the perfect cyborg. This would then make him responsible enough to wield the same power as Pluton. By the end of the story, I believe Franky will learn about his heritage and will return some races back to their original home using the pawpaw fruit. One example possibly could be the Kumate tribe, and ultimately fulfill the will of D alongside Luffy and his fellow Straw Hats. So that's pretty much it from me, except I do have a couple additional observations I made along the way I thought may be important to note. Firstly, Franky has a very strangely strong connection to Robin, which is shown throughout many colour spreads and some major moments in the story where they share dialogue. This is likely because both share traumatic pasts since being pursued by the world government, and might suggest Franky's original home has been destroyed like Ohara. If you look into the colour spreads particularly, it kind of gets a little weird, like Oda might ship them. They're not too far apart in age, and Franky and Robin do portray literally opposite personalities, but that's just food for thought. And finally, something else that I thought was a little strange is Franky's fashion can actually be seen throughout the story with many characters. So I'll be interested to see what Oda gives us in an SBS or something to explain why so many people are wearing this. Okay, so with that, thank you very much. Make sure you leave a comment on your thoughts. Shout outs to the TLA Discord always. Bushido was the one who let me know about Kid being maybe from South Blue. As I say, we have a video coming out very shortly about the whole sorbet agenda. It's massive in scope. It covers a lot of characters and stuff, so that'll be interesting to get out. Make sure you check out Smokey's his Alabaster arc review and his disco piece. He's a very good theorist, and he has this production that's very unique. Not many people have anything close to it, so check it out. Anyway, if you've made it this far, you've just won a free pair of pirate sandals. So let me know in the comments which one you want, and if you want 2 left, 2 right, 1 left, 1 right, just let me know. Anyway, much love, stroke a cat, peace.